Testing the audio. All right, test your audio. Test your audio.
You killed my mother. You killed my father. You killed my people. You took my father's sword. Ah!
It was the end that really was a great touch there.
Yeah.
Welcome to VCR, a vintage cinema rewind. We're bringing old movies to new viewers.
I'm Jason.
And I'm Blake. What is best in life, Jason?
To crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and to hear the lamentations of their women.
That's a pretty good impression.
Yeah, thank you. I was working on that.
Yeah, I know you and Annabelle spend countless hours honing
Making guttural sounds.
Yes.
Arnold.
You two are pretty much Arnold, the second and third coming.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we've got the first Arnold movie to talk
Yes.
about today. Conan the Barbarian from 1982. But before we get into that, a couple things to address. First, apologies that this is podcast episodes coming out a little bit late. COVID getting in the way of things has not been fun. Let me tell you that much. I would much rather have been recording podcasts than being sleeping for the last 7 days. On a separate note, one of our favorite actors from the podcast has passed away recently, James Caan.
Yeah, we just watched him, 2 movies ago?
Not that long ago, in Thief, which is honestly a fantastic movie, and James Caan's performance is a completely noteworthy, Oscar-worthy performance.
Absolutely amazing. And it was awesome to look into him before he passed away, to know about him. So then when I saw it on, I think, Twitter or something early in the morning. I was like, no!
Yeah, so we lose another great, James Liotta and James Caan this year, which is devastating. Yeah. So if you kind of want to dive into his filmography, Thief is a fantastic place to start. Otherwise, The Godfather is another absolutely incredible movie, which he is a large part of in the part one of the series. And another favorite that has a little bit more widespread appeal is Elf.
That was so awesome to find out, to connect those dots, because I had watched Elf before I knew who he was. Yeah. And then going back, I figured it out. But yeah, it's awesome that he had that range and that long of a career, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's one thing. He definitely was able to get in a lot of movies over his life, and a lot of great ones.
We'll drink a beer for him.
Yeah, cheers to that. All right, so let's dive into Conan the Barbarian, a movie that came out in 1982. And Jason, you want to start with the plot?
Yeah, this is a sword and sorcery hero epic of perfect proportions. A young barbarian's family and village is slaughtered by a snake-worshipping battle cult. They end up enslaving him. He's forced to push a heavy wheel, the Wheel of Pain, around in circles until he becomes Arnold-sized. Then they force him to fight in gladiator arenas, which, upon his release, he Swowed. He is forced to push a heavy wheel in circles, the Wheel of Pain, until he becomes Arnold-sized, then fighting gladiator arenas. Upon his release, he vows to find and kill his old master with the help of the Queen of Thieves and his sidekick Mongolian buddy.
Yeah, and not just his old master, but the person who slaughtered his family, his tribe, literally cuts his mom's head off while he's holding her hand. Yeah. It was a very graphic intro to the movie.
It really was. I wasn't expecting it to be that brutal.
Yeah.
For 1982, and we see that the critics found that a little too harsh. It was too intense at that time.
Yeah, a lot of interesting things to talk about when we get back to a look back at the times, for sure. So, yeah, there's a lot of hatred and vengeance that's brewing in Arnold's mind, Conan's mind, over his lifetime, as obviously spending your entire childhood and adolescence spinning a wheel at a mill is definitely going to give you a lot of time to be thinking about stuff like that.
Yeah,
so.
And he just got so jacked from that.
Yeah.
It's funny.
Arnold-sized jack.
Yeah. It's funny seeing him start as a kid, and there's 20 other people chained to it, and they're all pushing and pushing, and then he's 16 or something, and he's still pushing it. There's only a few others left, and then eventually it's just him pushing this massive like flywheel around.
It's kind of like in Ben-Hur, when Ben-Hur is like the only guy who survives the gallows. And he's just got that will to live because of the hatred that's been brewing in him over time, and like that need for revenge. It's very similar in that regard.
Yeah, exactly. And then from there, he the Gladiator Arena scenes were pretty fun.
Yeah, and helps him like train up and everything, and it explains a lot of how he came to be the person he is, like how he was able to gain that education and again like learn that combat and everything else. I thought that was a really good touch to adding to the lore of the character.
Yeah, they did it like it took a while to get to where the movie really starts.
Yes.
Like his plot line really starts. It takes like half an hour.
Yeah.
But
with a lot of voiceovers in between.
Yes.
A lot of narration.
Yeah.
Let's move on to characters and people you may know. So obviously our first character, Conan, we've kind of talked about him quite a bit at this point, played by Arnold Schwarzenegger in his first film role ever. And I gotta say, there's something pretty endearing about his portrayal in this. Like, even in his first role, he's pretty charismatic. He's somebody that it's clear that this guy could be a movie star.
Like,
And
you could see that in him from the beginning. And his accent, like, I have seen him in like a few things before that weren't like full films like this,
right?
And he was still working on his accent, but he got it to like a point where it was so fitting for this movie.
Yes, that was something that he did specifically work on with the linguistics coach, is to reduce his Austrian accent. That's actually a minor like bone to pick that I have with this movie, is why not just make like everybody else in the tribe Austrian, so that when you get to like him, he doesn't just stand out, because his dad has like the thick British accent, and so does everybody else in his tribe, and then he's like Arnold basically afterwards. I was like, this is such a minor thing, but
maybe everyone else on the Wheel of Pain was Austrian.
Yeah, I don't know, maybe
he picked it up.
Yeah, I guess so. Like, I don't know, a very, very minor complaint, I know, but as somebody who studies movies like I do, it stuck out to me. But anyway, Arnold, you obviously know as the Olympic weightlifter, Mr. Olympus, or whatever he was before, like the greatest weightlifter
Mr.
ever.
Universe.
Mr. Universe, that's what I was looking for. Transitions into movies. Some of my favorite Arnold movies being Predator, probably The Predator is number one, Terminator, and then The Running Man, which I don't know. Have you ever seen The Running Man?
No, I haven't.
Oh, it's such a great 80s movie, and we need to watch it for the podcast.
That's how I feel about Total Recall. I loved that one.
I almost watched Total Recall a few weeks ago, and I didn't end up doing it, but yeah, we'll have to have an Arnold month or something sometime to go through those, because the Running movie is like the most 80s movie ever. It's based on a book by Richard Bachman, obviously Stephen King's pen name. Other than the premise, completely different in everything from like the story and how it plays out to the
vibe.
The vibe, the vibe of the movie is very different from that of the book.
The gravitas.
Yes, it's still very entertaining. I remember Jess and I watched it early in our relationship, and we both were like, that was ridiculous, but I loved it.
That's awesome. I remember watching Last Action Hero, I think, when I was a kid, 1993. That was one of my favorites early on. And then he that's where he starts to get into more of the funny, like
the family
roles.
movies and stuff like that, because he had around that time, what's the one where he's like running around trying to get his kid a toy?
That's Last Action Hero. That's what I'm talking about,
not.
Isn't it?
No, that's different.
It's because he's trying to get his son, the Last Action Hero.
No, that you're thinking of a different movie then, because the Last Action Hero is something else.
No.
Yeah? I know for a fact because I almost watched
Jingle All the Way.
Jingle All the Way, there it is.
Okay, so I mixed those up.
And then there's also one where he's with the short guy.
Joe Pesci?
No, not Joe Pesci.
He plays the Penguin.
Yeah, yes, that's exactly who I'm thinking of.
Why are we blanking on this right now?
And they're like twins.
Yeah, Twins. It's called Twins,
Is
isn't
it just
it?
called Twins?
I'm pretty sure, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great movie. I
Yeah,
watched that
yeah.
in the last couple of years too, and Jess and I both really enjoyed that.
Yeah,
one.
that was 1988.
Yeah, that's a great movie.
And then we could keep talking so many of his movies.
Oh
but,
yeah,
like,
Arnold Schwarzenegger is a household name.
Yeah,
We don't need to
yeah.
go into too much detail. Like, he's the governor of
but there's a lot
California. At some
of a lot of
point.
movies that people haven't seen too. Like,
Yeah.
a lot of his older ones.
Arnold is an actor that you could dive into his filmography and have a lot of fun with, because there's a lot of like really great action films and there's a lot of really ridiculous comedy. And even some like heartwarming family movies. Like, I don't know, Jingle All the Way is maybe not regarded as a heartwarming family movie. People kind of hate that movie.
Yeah.
and love to hate that movie, but
Kindergarten Cop. It's not the tumor.
yeah, he's just
Wait,
like,
is
he's
that
so
that
good
one?
at churning out great quotes too.
Yeah.
But let's move on. I want to quickly talk about the friends that Conan makes along his journeys that are very important to his character and to the plot. So first is Sabotage, the warrior thief that Conan befriends pretty early on in his travels. It almost becomes a buddy cop or a buddy kind of movie between the two of them.
Yeah, yeah.
Very close kind of relationship. Not played by anybody significant, as well as the other character in their group being Valeria. And Valeria is a really interesting character, and I actually really liked how they wrote Valeria. She's written as Conan's equal in combat.
yeah.
She's an Amazonian type of woman.
And this is the 80s, and we're seeing her, like, we're seeing Conan let her take care of the bad guys because he trusts her to, and she does the same for him. Like, it's really cool to see.
Yeah, played by Sandal Bergman, who isn't a household name, actually. She did a couple of similar types of movies. She kind of got typecast. She did She and then Red Sonja afterwards, and then kind of faded into obscurity after that, which is kind of disappointing, and I think that's a little bit just the sign of the times, like, and kind of running out of traction with these kind of sword and sorcery type of movies.
Like, it had its place. Like, this, I think this was, like, around the time that, well, the comics were crazy in the 70s.
Yeah.
So they were releasing these after those like kids who grew up with the comics were like really getting into them. So maybe it just died out a bit.
Yeah.
I heard Red Sonja was amazing.
Really?
I want to put that on my list.
Yeah, we could. Yeah, it might not ever get into the podcast with how many movies we have to watch, but definitely worth checking out if you really enjoyed the movie Conan, Red Sonja. It also has Arnold in a supporting role, I believe, as well.
Oh, awesome.
So our next character, who is maybe a little bit less important to the gang, but is actually the narrator of our film, the Wizard, played by Mako. Which is actually an interesting Japanese actor and voice actor. I
didn't look into him.
Yeah, he did some voice acting for some really popular TV shows like Samurai Jack and a couple of other things.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, very big, very interesting filmography. I'm not going to dive too deep into him just because he's not absolutely crucial to the movie, and we have a couple other people that I want to talk about. Thulsa Doom is the main villain of the film. He's the leader of the snake cult group that we see who murders Arnold's entire... I gotta switch to Conan. So who murders Conan's entire family at the opening scenes of the film and then sells Conan into slavery.
And he has a great haircut.
It's something all right. It's something all right. Played by James Earl Jones.
Yeah.
Very distinct voice that you would know as the voice of Darth Vader and Mufasa. And the Lion King. Like, almost a household name, I would say. James Earl Jones. Like, if he's not a household name, he's like, a household
ask
voice.
your parents. Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
If you don't know.
Also, a pretty prominent theater actor. I didn't realize that, but he's won a bunch of Tonys over his lifetime, and really important in that scene as well. The last character, people you may know, that I wanted to mention was the king who sets Conan and his gang of thieves off on their adventure and kind of, I guess, sets the the team off on a hunch, basically, of where they'd find Thulsa Doom, because Thulsa Doom has taken his daughter, the princess, played by Max von Sydow, which is an actor who, as soon as I saw him, I was like, I know that guy.
Yeah, I had that feeling too.
He's acted in roles like Shutter Island and Flash Gordon. Flash Gordon,
Right.
not a good movie. Not a good movie, but very entertaining.
Yeah.
But he's somebody who he's been in a number of other films as well. Those were just the two that I really recognized him from. He actually did this movie for his son, who is a longtime Conan fan at this point in time. So it's cool to see an actor take on a role for somebody else, basically.
Yeah, that's fun.
And this is directed by John Milius, one of the writers for Apocalypse Now, which is really neat. Piece of interesting fan or film history. And Oliver Stone, who I hadn't heard the name before, but Oliver Stone is actually a very prolific director.
I've heard the name, I just can't place it.
He did, most recently, he did the film Snowden, which is a pretty good movie with Joseph Gordon-Levitt.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed that one. He did Platoon, which I haven't seen, but I've always
That's
really
on my
wanted to
list,
watch.
yeah.
It's a good military comedy. And he also did Natural Born Killers, which is very famous.
We should do that.
We should. I've never watched it in full because I didn't enjoy it the first time I saw it. But
We did a Woody Harrelson movie.
we have not done Woody Harrelson yet.
Oh, we got to fit him in.
Yeah, for sure we will.
Okay.
I'm closed out characters and people.
So I have one that you didn't catch. I know a little bit more about Arnold, apparently, potentially, but his best friend Franco Columbo is in this movie. So
I did see that. See that.
So you know about him. They just grew up together. Like they came up together in bodybuilding.
Right, and this was and they went on to do some other films together as well, right?
Yeah. He was in Conan, Terminator, The Running Man. He's mostly he's not an actor, but he's a big guy.
Right.
So he fits into a lot of Arnold's movies.
Right, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, so, yeah, he wasn't in anything really recent, but 80s and 90s, he was in everything, basically, that Arnold was in.
Yeah.
Not everything, but yeah. But I thought that was cool, just because of, how they came up together.
Yeah, for sure.
They started working out on Muscle Beach together before they made it into the Mr. Universe and everything like that.
He's the Rob Schneider to Arnold's Adam Sandler.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, who is this movie for? I have a couple points here, but I'm actually looking for you to kind of filter this and give me some other ideas. The first and foremost who this movie is for is the fans of the sword and sorcery genre.
Yeah.
And if you're a big fan of that genre, you don't actually have a ton of movies really or big blockbuster movies to dive into. I did a bit of a dive on the genre itself. The other movies that are pretty popular in that are classified in that are The Clash of the Titans, and which is actually 80s movie before it was the most recent remake. Dragonheart and Heavy Metal. Heavy Metal's a movie that I really want to cover at some point.
I didn't have a look at that one.
It's a anthology movie and it's very famous. That I really do want to watch that at some point on the podcast. There was also The Beastmaster and The Never-Ending Story, which The Never-Ending Story is a movie that I do really enjoy. But like I said, there really hasn't been, and specifically in the last 20 years, there hasn't really been many live-action movies of this genre that have come out.
Yeah, like A Knight's Tale, but that's just knights. It's just sword without sorcery.
Exactly.
You have Merlin. There's been various Merlin movies.
And the sword and sorcery genre is pretty specific, right? It's kind of like that hero's journey, it's in the name, the epic battles of warriors, but then there's also the wizardry and magic that's happening as well. Yeah, like medieval kind of movies don't not every medieval movie is going to be a sword and sorcery movie.
Yeah.
Recently, Pixar actually did the animated film Onward, which is apparently kind of a unique spin on the genre. I haven't seen it, but it's like an urban Sword and Sorcery film.
Oh, okay, that's fun.
Yeah. So I kind of alluded to it as well. Like, I think if you're kind of interested in that hero's journey type of story, then this is also kind of an interesting movie to view, because we see the motivation behind Arnold. We see him grow as into an adult and foster like that hatred inside of him to go on and do all of these great things. Arnold Schwarzenegger, if you're a big fan of him, then this 100%. Is a great movie to check out, especially because it's such an early look into his career as an actor. He actually struggled to develop his career up until this point because he was told like his body was too weird, he had a funny accent, and that his name was too long for the movie industry.
And too different for like Americans to pronounce or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. So this was Arnold being told no up to this point in time, and then he does this. It's very popular when it comes out, and it kind of sets him on this really great trajectory to be the Arnold that we know now.
Basically, he's almost like the first, like, The Rock or something like that. Like,
yeah, like transitioning from some sort of like physical fitness type of role.
Yeah.
He probably is in that discussion. Like, I imagine The Rock would credit Arnold Schwarzenegger for his transition.
Yeah.
I'm not thinking of too many others because this would have been probably a couple years prior to, I know it's a couple years prior to The Princess Bride with Andre the Giant.
Yeah.
But maybe the viewers know something that we don't and could comment on that. Who this movie is for. I put fans of Dungeons and Dragons. This is kind of I feel like a lot of Dungeons and Dragons players who are interested in the Conan lore have probably already watched this, but if you're kind of maybe looking for some inspiration into your future campaigns, then this is probably a good, interesting look at what you could be doing, or even like other campaign style games that are in that genre. I think you're gonna really enjoy the storytelling in this movie.
Yeah.
Actually, funny enough, a little tangent on that. I have played Dungeons and Dragons twice. It was the same campaign. We played it a couple times. I had a lot of fun, and our campaign was actually the way that our characters acted after watching this movie. I was like, it's really funny because we acted out like the group, like similar to this group kind of thing, and it was pretty. It was fun watching like a live action of like a little bit of what we had acted out in that. So it's kind of neat.
Yeah, that's pretty fun.
Who else do you think this movie is for?
I don't know when I was planning to talk about this, but something really cool happened recently. Have you caught up with Stranger Things?
I am not caught up with Stranger Things. Okay.
So, there's a certain scene where Hopper has Conan's sword.
Oh, nice.
Yes.
That's awesome.
And like, Hopper, the actor, I forget his name, he was super pumped about it. Mm-hmm. They were going through swords or something, and he's like, can we get something like Conan's or something? And they actually got the Conan
that's awesome.
Sword for this scene. So we see it twice, and like, I was watching after just watching this for this episode,
right?
And I was like, "That's Conan's sword," and like Annabelle's like, who gives a shit?
Yeah,
and I was like, "No, like this is sick."
Yeah, that's cool.
I like looked on Reddit as soon as I watched that, and there's all these like 30 to 40-year-old guys who were like
geeking out over it.
Yeah. Like and the actor for Hopper, he like posted an Instagram thing, and he's like, "I'm so pumped that we were able to slip this in."
Yeah,
and
that's really cool.
It was really cool. Because it's a very unique sword.
Oh, yeah, very unique sword. Like, not something... I mean, the fact that it was actually created for this movie, like it's a legitimate sword.
Yeah,
you could swing that thing around and knock somebody's head off pretty easy.
Anyways, it was really cool to see that. So anyone who's, like, super into... Stranger Things, you might want to check it out.
It's a cool like connection to something that's very mainstream right now.
Yeah, and especially because it is the 80s in Stranger Things, and those kids love Dungeons and Dragons, and so there's a little bit of a connection there. Just a little fun thing. I was so pumped when I saw it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, is there anybody else that I've missed that you think this movie is for?
I feel like you want me to tell you, but I don't know.
I honestly like.
Okay.
I kind of struggle because, I'll front run this. This isn't movie for me, I would say. Like, I enjoyed aspects of the film, but if you had to ask me if this is a movie that I would add to my annual watches or something like that, then it's probably a no. Now, I will say I would watch Conan the Destroyer, the sequel.
Yeah, I want to see.
Yeah.
Apparently, the sequel was like very well regarded by fans of Conan.
Yeah, apparently it's a really fun movie as well.
I think I've seen both. Like, I watched these when I was like 14. So
Yeah.
this is a movie for like 14-year-olds who might be like watching stuff with your dad or something like that,
Yeah,
or your grandpa or like your mom, whoever. But
Yeah.
like this is like a thing that builds nostalgia.
12
It's pure
to
nostalgia for
14,
me.
yeah, 12 to 14 is a great time to watch this movie,
Yeah.
I think.
When I feel like in the 80s it was like 6-year-olds watching this. This was very heavily targeted towards like
Really?
like kids loved Conan. And but I don't think they were expecting such brutality and the nudity and everything
Yeah.
like that. So but I'm sure there were kids watching it that shouldn't have been watching it.
Oh,
in the 80s.
absolutely. Absolutely.
But yeah, for like certain age kids, yeah, I don't know if I would suggest it to anybody to have your kid watch. But
like I said, 12 to 14, you're probably all right. Like, and it probably, this is where I saw it, because I think I did see part of Conan the Destroyer on TV growing up, and it would have been on like a late night on like Teletoon or I don't remember what all the channels were called.
Might have been on like, I don't know, HBO or something. Like just an old.
No, it wasn't on that.
Not HBO.
It was like,
but
YTV or something like that.
It couldn't have been YTV.
Yeah, late night YTV movie.
I guess they probably censored it.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah,
so
okay,
like, you probably, if you want to check it out with your kid, if you see it on TV, it's probably censored or clipped some of these bits. But anyway, let's move on.
They clipped the bits.
When to watch? I think this is a pretty good Friday night, don't think too hard kind of movie.
Yeah. Like, you've been tired all week, you just want to get lost in something, and you might not pay attention to all of it, because it's a long movie.
Yeah, it feels like a long movie. It's not actually that long, but it's just because of maybe some pacing issues, and it's not up to like the current day's pacing. Where it, like we can contrast this with Heat, and this was something that I did think about writing down. Is that Heat moves at a breakneck speed the entire movie, whereas this kind of plods along, especially in certain parts.
Yeah. Annabelle missed the first half hour of like the slow build to him becoming Arnold, and I mean Conan, and then after that she watched the majority of it, and she was like, "No, what? The pacing's not that bad," which is strange for her to say.
Interesting.
There was like it was plotting, but it wasn't boring. Like, there was always something happening, but it wasn't always ultra exciting.
Yeah, the biggest offenders are probably at the beginning, where it really builds on that plot. There's that heavy like voiceover narration. So to skip over that bit, you kind of miss out on part of the motivations.
But that's not always important. Like, you can kind of get why he's doing it.
Yep.
Because like, I don't know how well this holds up to the comic books. This would be great for the people who like the comic books, obviously, but at the same time, this was like a mashup of a few different storylines in the comic books.
Yeah, and a few different characters as well, because even the character Conan, this is a little bit Conan the Barbarian and also Cull the Conqueror as well, right?
Yeah.
Kind of a mashup of those two. So it's probably interesting to kind of dissect all of that as a fan of the comic series and the novellas. I think they started as novellas, maybe.
Yeah, like that kind of
something like that. A very famous writer was behind that series. I guess we could drop his name. Robert E. Howard.
Yes, like fans of comic books and like this genre would know that name.
Absolutely, yeah, because he kind of invented the genre. It was pulp magazines where it was initially. Where it was in initially.
Great nostalgic feeling to this movie for me. Like, if you're feeling like a fun 80s movie, this is a good thing to watch on like a Friday, Saturday, maybe a hungover Sunday.
Yeah,
Oh.
I can see this being an afternoon
Yeah.
movie.
A hungover Sunday where you watch like every Conan.
Well, the first two probably. You probably don't need to watch like the 2011 reboot.
You might. Apparently, so one review that I was just watching a little clip of Joe Rogan and Quentin Tarantino talking about Conan, like the Barbarian, the original, and everything. And they said the second is their favorite, and that for the first little bit of the newest one, while Conan is still a child, that actor just killed it. And that sequence, the beginning sequence, that was so boring, and the one that we just watched,
Right.
or like it took a while, was absolutely perfect
It
compared to the
added more
comic
weight
books.
to the film then?
Yeah,
And the
but
character?
then Jason Momoa or whoever wrote for him didn't follow up with that
okay.
first beginning clip, so that it might be worth it.
Yeah, it might be worth checking out, especially if you're a fan of Conan and Arnold's portrayal, to see that. It's almost like comparing Batmans, right?
Yeah.
So, where to watch? Right now, you can stream this on Crave Stars or Amazon Stars, either of those add-ons, two of those subscription platforms, or check it out on Just Watch and see where else you might be able to rent it or stream it from.
Yeah. Just watch. It's where it's at.
Yeah.
It's where it's all at.
So at this point, it's time for us to cut it off. We've been as spoiler-free as possible, and now we're going to dive into the movie, and it full of spoilers. And I think Jason wants to break because he's clinking on my drink to see if I've drank enough. All right, well, we'll be back in a few.
We'll be back.
All right, we're back. So, spoiler full.
Yeah.
Let's just talk themes first. Let's bang this out of the way really quick.
I think the first theme is that guttural Arnold is the best Arnold.
It's definitely Arnold at his best for sure. Like the amount of times that he was like, "Ugh," like I had a good laugh out loud. Yeah, of all of those like moments. Definitely a highlight Arnold noise film.
Yes. Like that's if anybody can make like a clip of just every time Arnold is like
If you could do that for the podcast,
oh man,
that would be
unreal.
amazing. Yeah. The theme of revenge and avenging your family is obviously extremely important here. Just the theme of family in general, because Arnold loses his family or Conan loses his family from such an early age, and then he goes on over his travels to really develop this family that he has with Sabotage and Valeria.
Yeah.
And even the wizard eventually. Very close relationship with his group, basically. There's also a bit of a theme of power here, and what people's values are, because Thulsa Doom, initially, his motivations at the beginning of the film are, I think, to do with like a prophecy of sword and steel or something like that.
Yeah. There's this prophecy that because Conan's father introduces like the concept of like how man got steel from the gods, and so there's this prophecy of steel that is kind of central, and it's like an unanswered question that both Arnold is kind of like, it's in the back of his mind as something to like figure out before he dies, but that's kind of what Thulsa Doom is after a little bit too.
Yeah, that's his original primary motivation, but as the film goes on and he gets older, he begins to realize that doesn't really matter to him, and it's just the power over people and the people that worship him is what's really important. And we get that scene where he has the woman jump to her death. Very reminiscent of Midsummer. Side note, fantastic movie.
Oh, I'm so glad you watched that too.
Yeah. Oh, so good. So good. Ari Aster is a really great director, and I'm really excited to watch where he goes. But complete tangent. So that's kind of also important is that power and whether you rule with like fear or love, because that's something also that's important to this film. Is we know that based on the narration that Conan is going to go on to be a great leader and a king of people, and I think that this film is kind of that build up and that
It's like the backstory of how he becomes a good king, because it balances like what does it mean to have power, and what makes power, and how are you going to use it.
And as a side note here, this is something that at this point in time, like, this gave me nostalgia for another movie, actually. The second Mad Max movie. I think that there's probably a connection here. Whether the director really liked the original Mad Max series, I'm gonna look it up really quick. Mad Max 2: The Road Warrior it's almost a very similar feeling movie to this, because there's
Danny
the narration.
DeVito.
What's that?
Danny DeVito.
Danny DeVito's our man that we talked about earlier.
All right.
Very rare end up tangent.
Sorry.
But it's got that narration of the telling of a great leader and how our narrator came to know our leader.
Yeah.
And the story of his journey and his adventure to become the person that he is. And so the Mad Max 2 actually came out in 1981, so just a year before this film, interesting.
Interesting.
I think that's a cool connection there, or something that I connected to. Mad Max 2 did it better, but whatever, we'll move on, because that's one of the greatest movies of all time. Whatever, we'll move on.
Oh, so to go back to the theme, King Osric is also like he balances that. He balances out Thulsa Doom in the other side, and he in the movie says, "There comes a time, thief, when the jewels cease to sparkle, when the gold loses its luster, when the throne room becomes a prison, and all that is left is a father's love for his child." Yeah, again, like, this is all shaping who Conan's gonna become, because right before that we see Conan steal the jewel.
Yeah, that really massive jewel from Thulsa Doom's compound.
Yeah.
Which we get that, like, massive snake battle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that was really fun. Like, it was like they snuck in really easily, and then he had to fight that massive snake, and then later,
and then they just kind of like dip, and then it's not really brought up until like way later that
when he's like, "You killed my snake." Thulsa Doom is like, "What the fuck, man?" And then now Thulsa only has like a tiny little snake. He's like, "This is what I got to deal with now. I used to have a big snake."
Oh, jeez. That's all I've got for themes. I want to move into effects and filming, because this is probably the highlight of the movie for me, is the effects and filming. So the movie itself is filmed in Spain.
Great landscapes.
Very cool landscape, and you get a pretty decent mix of things. I wouldn't say this is like the greatest movie ever for different mixes of scenery. I think Lord of the Rings probably does that slightly better, but still very cool seeing those different scenes. Like, Spain is definitely no New Zealand, but it's close.
Yeah.
And this is also where I wrote that Mad Max 2 note about how the storytelling is very similar. The difference, the contrast here, is I think this movie relied a little too much on the exposition of the narrator to kind of move the plot forward and explain what was happening.
Yeah.
There's definitely a balance to be had with that, and I think that this film maybe was on the wrong side of that balance. Arnold and Sandal did all their own stunts because they couldn't find suitable body doubles for this film.
Yeah.
Because this is pretty early on in both of their careers, right?
No one was as big as Arnold.
Yeah. And he had to tone down as well for the movie.
And you can kind of tell a little bit. Like, I thought, I was like, I know it's early Arnold, but I thought he was... And he still is massive. Yeah.
Oh, he's freaking huge.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, he could actually grab the sword from his back in the movie. So.
Oh, no way. That's why you see him at one point switch it from his back to his side.
Yeah, maybe. It's just a little too tough. It's like,
yeah.
Anyway, so I think it's really cool to see actors do their own stunts. However, I think that in a movie like this, it probably has a bit of a negative impact in the fact that it probably waters down some of the action, because the studio is not going to want to like risk these people.
And you can kind of tell that.
Exactly. And I think that that's another kind of knock against the movie, is that might be why some of the action doesn't always feel like up to snuff. However, Arnold did have like weapons training. He had martial arts training, and he even got horseback riding lessons from specialists leading up to the movie. So he actually even trained with an 11-pound broadsword for 2 hours a day to be able to wield that for 3 months. And each broadsword that they made for him cost $10,000, and they kind of had to make it look weathered. So they really like beat the hell out of those things.
Yeah, and it's so awesome that it came back to like now.
Yeah, that it comes full circle.
Yeah.
He also learned some climbing techniques as well as how to fall and roll and even jump from upwards of 15 feet in the air.
Wow.
So he's pretty battle ready at this point after this movie, which is cool. And this movie is not only is it a great credit to Arnold's training in that regard, it's also a pretty good training into his acting career, because this is a movie that Arnold actually credits with improving his acting chops, and specifically with having two massive actors around with Max von Sydow and James Earl Jones. Like those are two massive actors at this point in time who have both very famous and well-known movies. So he said that he both of them were really open to helping him learn how to become a better actor. So very, very impactful film to his film career, obviously. He did get, as we mentioned before, that voice coach to lessen his accent, which is something that even Jess pointed out while we were watching, is that she noticed that his accent wasn't as thick as in other films since then even. And he was actually supposed to be the narrator of the film. It wasn't supposed to be Mackie, the wizard, but the studio didn't want him to because of his accent.
Sean Connery and John Huston were considered for some roles in this too.
Yeah, there's a few big actors that turned down roles in this, and I can understand why. This was a reach for the people who were trying to produce. It was definitely a risk for sure. Yeah. And you and I have seen since that this type of genre doesn't always land with audiences, and it doesn't seem to be that big blockbuster genre that similar types of films, like Lord of the Rings is a fantasy film that has like similar aspects in the sword and sorcery genre, but it's still more of a fantasy film, and something like that resonates with people more. Yeah,
that's fair.
The snake cult of Thulsa Doom is actually modeled off of, it's called the flagellants, which is a cult that came out of Germany at the time of the Black Plague in the 14th century.
That kind of fits. I could see them, like, they acted German.
Jesus. But that's where the white robes came from, and why some of them are whipping themselves. It's actually specifically from that cult.
Self-flagellation.
Yeah, and that's like something that I actually wanted to mention. The way that I'll describe this film is that there's a lot of aspects that I like about this film and a lot of aspects that I don't like about this film. And one thing that I really do enjoy about this film is the costume and the costume design of the film. And that was the only one that stood out to me. I was like, these like white robes are a little lame, but they're actually based on like a real life cult, which is really cool. That they kind of have their roots in something.
Yeah. And you know what? I feel like it fit for that time just because of like, at least in a modern depiction of what the 70s, like 60s and 70s, like hippie culture was like. It felt like that was like reminiscent of that, mixed with the cult. Like, if you take it too far, you could be like this kind of thing.
Well, and that's something that we're getting to it actually pretty soon, but we'll talk about it right now. A look back at the times. The Thulsa Doom cult is something that you can draw a lot of comparisons to the Jim Jones and the Jonestown cult, and especially that power over men, basically being able to influence people to even kill themselves. And that's something like this movie is a few years after that massacre and that tragedy, so there's definitely a lot that this film was saying about that as well.
Interesting.
And at the time, the movie itself, like you kind of alluded to before, drew a lot of controversy because of the violence, because this is a pretty violent movie, and not only that, it shows a lot of the graphic violence, like when Thulsa Doom's head is cut off. It's not necessarily the cleanest cut off ever. I rewatched that right before we started recording, but he holds the heads up and then just kind of tosses it down, which is kind of epic.
It stumbles down the steps.
But there's other scenes in the movie that are pretty graphic. There's some Arnold butt.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, the sex scene with Witch at the beginning.
Yeah, never bone a witch.
Yeah.
Life lessons. That's kind of the big aspects of looking back at the times there. I want to talk about score, because this is one of those other things that I really liked about this movie. The score is absolutely fantastic. Not only does it fit the film, it fits the genre extraordinarily well. It's not something that I think we see often, is a score fitting a movie. Like, I can't picture the score itself. It's not something that's necessarily stuck in my head, but it fit the movie so well at the time that it's something that I don't always notice the score, but when I do, it says something about how great of a score it is. What's really interesting about this score is that Basil Polierdis was actually hired for Conan before the filming even began. Usually what happens is the main scenes of the film are filmed, and then that's when the composer steps in and starts writing the theme of the movie, whereas he was really already working like in the early stages of the production.
Yeah, like I saw that he had storyboards.
Yes,
like
that's
the
where he
initial
started
storyboards.
with. And then they kind of modified the score as they went throughout filming, and then before the end of production is when they recorded that score. So he was involved every step of the way, and that's where he helped develop that mood. Because I think that the score adds a lot to the mood of the film, and that's one of the highlights to me for this movie.
And this is kind of crazy. Like this might have been one of the first uses of like a software, like hardware and software system for producing the music of the film. They were able to modify the tempo of his compositions and synchronize them with the action in the film after he made the score, kind of. This is something that I found, like, it's one of the
It's
like,
probably
it's
one of the
pretty
first.
early.
However, I know we talked about Tangerine Dream on a previous episode, and I can't remember the movie that they were famous for. Oh, Thief. There was use of using that electronic.
No, that was the first synthetic music. But so this was like one of the earlier times when they were able to use like a software to like change the tempo. Of the music as it like.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
So like that's where the music fits so well, because like let's say like swords clash. The music hits at that right time. Right. So they were able to like really, or at least start to refine that for the first time.
Right.
We didn't really talk too much about the effects, like the snake and the cut off head, like a little bit there, but also the fight scenes.
Yes, like the choreography between the fight scenes.
Choreography and fight scenes is lacking if you're comparing it to today's standards.
Yeah.
Back then, I think it was at like a 7 out of 10.
Yeah, it was okay.
And you did mention the fact that they didn't have actual body doubles for like the stunt work, so I think that definitely has an effect there. But like, there's this one scene where you see, I think it was Columbo, Arnold's friend. He like swings a sword to try and take off Arnold's head, and it clunks into the stone.
Right.
And it's like that's where I was like, that probably wasn't supposed to happen because it was like a fake stone, but like they were actually like swinging hard. I don't know.
Yeah, it was just okay.
That's where it doesn't hold up, and that's where like you have to remember you're watching an early 80s film.
Yeah, and what's going into it, like you said, and like I said, like not having stunt doubles really, I think, hurts a film like this.
Yeah, but they did use mechanical effects for like the snakes and the transition of Thulsa Doom into a snake. That was
kind of interesting.
That was pretty good, and it was like creepy enough that I think it would have like really freaked out audiences back then.
On the flip side, I will say one thing that absolutely did not work was the scene where Arnold is brought to life by those spirits. They looked horrible.
Yeah, horrible. Like that looked like a 1910 cartoon.
Yeah, and she's kind of like batting them off and stuff. That was a low point in the effects for me.
Yeah, for sure.
And the film in general.
Yeah. Yeah, and honestly, like, the storyline there of her bringing him back to life, and then she was like, I owe something to gods, and then...
Right.
No, what? And Thulsa Doom using snakes as arrows.
All right, that's kind of
Like,
cool.
Like, it was kind of cool, but kind of ridiculous. Like, it was...
He just, like, I like how he kind of, like, licks them straight, and then, like, shoots them off, and then they're like, ah, damn, like, snake, and then they kind of, like, pull it off, and it's like...
Yeah, and...
goes back to being a snake.
Yeah, and then, like, you actually see Arnold pulling a real snake. Like, he's pulling it straight, and then it's like a real snake that's, like, flailing around.
Yeah.
And it was just so crazy that, like, it's almost like watching, like, The Room or something. Like, there's certain parts of this movie where you watch it just for the, like,
you have to suspend
silliness.
Belief a little bit to make some of this work. Let's talk sequels, prequels, and reboots. Like, as we mentioned already, this is based on a series of pulp fiction novels. It's that Kroll and Conan story hybrid. It's heavily based in Celtic mythology and the Celtic people, which is really cool. Half of my family is kind of that Celtic origin, so it's really cool to see that being portrayed on screen. There was actually supposed to be at least 4 sequels that Arnold signed onto for the Conan franchise. And so Conan the Destroyer, we've talked about it a little bit, and Roger Ebert even really enjoyed the film. He said it was more fun than the first even, that he liked it more. But it only had like an okay box office performance, and nobody in the cast or crew was really enthusiastic about doing a third movie, so it kind of went into development hell and hasn't been released since. However, there is talks about doing a movie with Arnold himself called King Conan or The Legend of Conan. Which they started developing in 2018, and then COVID kind of shelved it again. So we'll see if it ever sees the light of day. But it is in development potentially.
That would be so fun. And like, if they do it well, it would bring so many like new fans to this area of film, like Sword and Sorcery. Yeah. And like, I think it's like a right time for that.
It might be because of all the, like, we have Game of Thrones and we have the Lord of the Rings series coming out later this year. We had The Wheel of Time. There's a lot of like really famous novel adaptations, but also that fantasy realm where they're not quite sword and sorcery, but that's where like something like Conan could kind of stand out against all of those other films and TV shows. There is actually a third movie that did come out called Kull the Conqueror. Yeah. Apparently it's an awful movie, like just an absolute dumpster fire.
I want to watch it, see how bad it is.
It is borderline unwatchable, and the director has gone on record and said that the studio heavily interfered with the production of the film, and that is his main blame. I mean, you never know, right? Like, often it is the studios that cause problems, but you know, it is also a question of whether or not the director was doing his job all that well. Or maybe the storyboard was garbage to begin with.
Yeah, like the writing in general. Yeah. Like the adaptation of what story they were using. It was 1997. I feel like 1997 is kind of like a...
That's our bubble year for bad CGI. So if it had CGI, it I would say late 90s to early 2000s, you kind of want to avoid movies with CGI in them. Yeah. Because it's like the reliance of 3D in like similar to the late 2000s, early 2010s after Avatar. Yeah. It kind of became a crutch for a few years, and it does not hold up to today's standards by any means. There's also the Reboot, which we did briefly mention, that came out in 2011 with Jason Momoa, which did pretty horribly, both commercially and critically. Mm-hmm. But if you're a big fan of the Conan movie, you can always dive into the book series. As you and I would probably agree, usually the book series is better than the TV or movie series anyway. Case in point, the Dark Towers movie, which never
Yeah.
happened. Oh my God, was that bad?
Yeah.
But other stuff we could be talking about that for days. But it's nice to know that there's something that if you're a really big fan of this world, that you can go back into the adaptations or what it was adapted from and get into that. I think that's really cool to be able to do that. Legacy. There's also some really interesting legacy bits here. I think we've talked about some of them already, about how this put Arnold on the map acting-wise.
Yeah.
It helped improve his acting. Funny enough, Arnold's contract restricted him from starring in other Sword and Sorcery films.
Wow.
So that's why we don't really see Arnold in this type of role afterwards. However, I think that's a blessing in disguise because he didn't end up getting typecast as in these kind of movies.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
that's often something you see with an actor is everybody loves them in something. And I'm trying to think of like who a good example of this is, and then they never really able to move on from their career, despite maybe them even being passionate about something else. They might not even have been passionate about the role to begin with, and now suddenly they're stuck in that.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of someone.
That's the problem, is because once you get typecast, you kind of become forgettable.
Yeah.
It's
yeah,
a little bit what's
exactly.
happening with Chris Pratt right now, actually.
Yeah.
He's becoming a generic like action
Yeah.
star, and he's not the best at it, to be honest, because I would say right now, like Tom Cruise is still killing it in
Yeah.
that role, and there's a couple other action stars, but it seems to be what Chris Pratt is wanting to pursue, and all the power
He's
to him,
getting
I guess,
paid.
but-
He's
getting paid. Yes,
Yeah,
he is.
yeah.
I can't really knock him too much because he's
Yeah.
getting paid more per minute than I will in my life.
Yeah. Also in the Stranger Things, before we see the sword, somebody has a Conan the Barbarian poster on their wall, which is just another
cool.
little nod there.
Yep.
And then like
Cool
there's
poster as well, by the way.
Yeah, that was phenomenal. Like
yeah.
they crushed that like time period. Everything there was like perfect.
Yeah, I
Like,
really
that
enjoyed.
was a great poster.
Yeah, the aesthetics of it
And
were really
that has been replicated multiple times.
Oh,
in
yeah,
so many.
absolutely.
That's one of the references that you'll often see. Another funny thing that comes up a lot is like referencing Conan in different movies and shows and stuff like that. Like Schwarzenegger actually says "to hell with you" again in another movie, The Running Man.
No way.
And he says that like the same quote in Conan. There's a muscular librarian in this one show, and someone referenced him as Conan the Librarian.
Nice.
Yeah. Conan punches a camel in Jingle All the Way. Sorry, Arnold punches a reindeer in Jingle All the Way, the exact same way Conan punches a camel
Nice.
in Conan.
What's really interesting, legacy-wise, is how this genre really didn't take off after this.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of
Until Lord of the Rings, this was the epitome of sword and
fantasy,
sorcery.
yeah. And
Yeah.
you can't even really classify... I would not classify Lord of the Rings as a sword and sorcery film. Like, I really would classify that
It is
more
like
as a fantasy.
it's closer to high fantasy.
Yes,
yeah.
exactly.
But at the time, there wasn't high fantasy, and like
Yeah.
sword and sorcery was kind of like the area of the first. Like it was like the beginnings of fantasy.
Well, and that's what
potentially.
you and I were kind of like when we started to do our research into what we were going to watch, because we did want to watch a fantasy film. Pre-Lord of the Rings, there really isn't a lot of commercial successes in this genre.
Yeah.
And I think part of it is because of the trouble with filming and the special effects in these types of films. It's a big risk, like the Lord of the Rings is one of the largest risks of all time.
Yeah.
And it paid off, and I'm very thankful for that.
Yeah.
And it set the movie world off on and even the TV world
And,
off
yeah.
on a really interesting path.
Along that same line, you like with Wheel of Time, they haven't really been able to nail down how magic works, like to look at magic. So
Right.
translating magic well to the screen, even like Harry Potter, if you're like a diehard Harry Potter fan, like I am kind of, like
You're a diehard Harry Potter fan.
The magic, like it wasn't the same as when you read it. Like they just did generic sparks. Like they didn't say the spells often, and like, I won't get too far into it, but magic is hard to do. So the sorcery part of Sword and Sorcery, half the time it's going to look like it did in Conan.
Yeah. And this is something that you and I off Mike talked a little bit about, but this is something that I did actually write down as well, is I kind of wonder if the stories themselves are a little too straightforward in their narratives.
Yeah.
And if it becomes a bit of a problem with the expectations of the audience versus what these films are about.
It's like they're trying to combine, like, a good action film. They basically just turn into action films, like dumb action films.
Yeah.
When the Sword and Sorcery, like, idea, the books and like the lore and everything that you could get into it hasn't been able to be translated well.
Well, and there's probably something to be said about like a deep theological kind of movie. Like, I think if you were to explore the theology behind Conan and the cult and everything else, like, I think there's a really interesting movie there that you could make that explores like what it is to be a leader, because that's what this movie does touch on, is what does it mean to be a leader, and Conan and who he is to be as a leader in the future as the king. I think if you were to really dive into that theology and what it means to be human probably as well, that you could really explore an interesting film there. It's just, it seems to be really hard to have that aspect and have like the action aspect of a Sword and Sorcery. Like, there's probably a little bit of like studio expectations as well.
Yeah.
Like, not only are you trying to satisfy the hardcore fans of the genre, you're trying to satisfy mainstream audiences, and you're trying to satisfy the studio here.
And that's exactly what happened with Game of Thrones too. Like, we lost the magic aspects, and they ramped up a little bit of like the dumb politics stuff because that was easier to film, and like it didn't really carry the story forward. There's so many issues there.
And so here's the thing, though, is I actually have a very different opinion as you to that. And that's where it becomes hard to satisfy people, because I preferred the political aspects of Game of Thrones.
And that's what I actually agree with you there. This is what the mainstream kind of feels about it. That's what I was referencing. Sorry.
Right.
So I do agree with you there. Like, I liked the playing chess and everything, that everything was going on, but we lost some of the appeal of Sword and Sorcery.
The fantasy element.
Yeah, the fantasy element. Yeah.
Yeah, I like, and that's, as a side note, like I recently read the original Dune book, and there's something special about a really good political drama masked in something like a sci-fi or a fantasy. It's really fantastic when it's done well, and the first few series and first few books of Game of Thrones did that extraordinarily well.
No doubt.
And then it devolved into the end into hot garbage.
And I feel like that's what's happening with Wheel of Time. We've only seen one season, but like, there's so much more going on in the books, obviously.
So let's dive into our personal reviews on the partner factor. I'm going to be a little bit more down on this than you are, I think. And I'm going to tier this because, like I said before, there are aspects of this film that I really loved, and there are aspects of this film that I didn't enjoy. So for me, what I really loved was the soundtrack. It fit the film extraordinarily well. You can tell that the composer really thought about what is Sword and Sorcery, and how do I compose something that fits that genre. And it did it in such an extraordinarily way that I think this movie should be recognized for its soundtrack. That is the highlight for me. I really liked the costume and set design. However, I do have some problems with it, which I kind of mentioned before. But overall, very good job. For me, the story is the weakest element to the film.
And that's where it hurts the most.
Yeah. I didn't care enough about Conan avenging his family. Like, for me, I don't know what it was, but the stakes just didn't matter to me.
Yeah. They didn't translate that well from, like, the beginning intro sequence where it tries to get you to care.
Yeah.
And then his motivation after he gets the, that necklace diamond thing, the Eye of the Serpent, that's what it was called.
Yes.
After he gets that, and then King Osric is like, I'll give you all the jewels you want. And that seems like all Conan cares about at that point. So, yeah.
And the last part that I didn't really love about this film is I felt that Thulsa Doom his motives weren't really fleshed out enough for me to also care, because it's also really important to build an interesting villain. Like, obviously the Joker is the top of that, and having an interesting either backstory or even lack of backstory can really add to the character. But like, what motivates them? And I just didn't care. And maybe it came a little too late for me to care about Thulsa Doom's motivations, because he does eventually say, it's the power over people that really is what matters to me. And in the Prophecy of Steel, I didn't feel like was fleshed out enough for me at the beginning either. So like, I didn't care about that, and then I didn't really care about Thulsa Doom's motivations either. Conan's was kind of a one-note motivation of avenging his family. But what you see in a film about vengeance is there's often this discussion of like, well, what's next for you after this? Like, if you do eventually avenge your family, like, and even if you do, like, is it really going to make that hole in your life like actually disappear? And that really isn't explored here all that much, I don't think.
No. I don't remember if they go into that in the second, but like, that's kind of what it sets it up for. I feel like if you're gonna have any trilogy, setting up the character in the first one to have vengeance, and then the second one to be struggling with the fact that they had their vengeance and now what?
Right.
That makes sense, and I think it would have made sense for where they were going. But I definitely agree. Like, you don't care enough. The story wasn't there to support what his motivations were, really. Like, it didn't deepen it. It was very surface level.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm interested to hear. Like, I know that you're a little bit higher on this movie than me, so I really want to hear what your review of the film was.
Yeah, I think nostalgia obviously adds a lot to it, and I did watch this like with my dad when I was like 13, 14.
Right.
So it was really cool back then, especially because I got to see some boobs. Besides that, yeah, like, this is, like, it's not high on my list. I think I would rewatch it a few more times in my life, but it's not like a rewatchable thing. But I am gonna make my kid watch it. If I have some kids, I want them to watch it just for the nostalgia.
Yeah, that's completely fair.
Yeah, sorry.
And so it's good enough for you to want to share with somebody, I think, is where you land. Whereas for me, like, I don't think that I would share this, and it's not in the top 100 movies that I would probably even share with people. Like, there are other movies, like, since we've started this podcast, I have rewatched Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid with somebody. I have talked nonstop about Thief with anybody and everybody who even is mildly interested in the gangster genre. And this one, I think, is probably just going to be something that I don't really talk about after this podcast.
Yeah. Like, I think it's like a pop culture reference that you could like mention from time to time, but that's mostly it. Like, I watched this with somebody who watched it when it came out.
Right.
And they were so pumped about it, and they were so pumped
and it
about
mattered
showing.
To them.
Yeah, it mattered to them because at that time there wasn't that much.
Yeah.
So then that got passed on to me, and if you can keep that going, that's cool. But if it doesn't work, there's so many other ones.
Yeah, it's similar to my experience with E.T. and why I wanted to do E.T. on the podcast, because it means something to me, and it means something to somebody who's important to me.
Yeah.
So that's cool. That's cool that you have that with this film.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as well, like, you're a little bit higher on the fantasy genre than I am. Don't get me wrong. Like, the Lord of the Rings series is one of the greatest series of all time. Peter Jackson is an absolute monster in the fact that he even was able to get that greenlit and even at that point in time be able to direct that trilogy, and the way that he was able to produce it all together like that. But for me, like, I'm a big sucker for sci-fi, and I always have been. So I feel a little bit more at home with like The Thing or the Alien movie series and stuff like that. Like, that's what as a podcaster you're gonna get a little bit more from me. Whereas the fantasy genre is a little bit more your realm of expertise.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, but overall, there's some fun things within the movie. It was good. It's not great. It's Arnold. It's Arnold.
It's Arnold at a good spot and an
Yeah.
interesting spot in his career.
Yeah, and it's fun for some people. Fun, like not as fun for others. Whatever. It was enjoyable for me because of nostalgia, and that's basically the best like thing that I can pass on
Yeah.
to anybody else.
Well, and this is the kind of the last piece that I had in this section is I really enjoy doing research for this film.
Yeah.
There's a lot of cool backstory and interesting facts as well as perspectives from Arnold and the rest of the cast and the crew that have come out over the years that it's an absolute pleasure to be doing research for this one. I had a lot of fun. Like, obviously, I talked probably a lot in this episode because I was passionate about everything that I wanted to talk about, even though I wasn't passionate about the film itself.
Yeah.
I am a fan of Arnold. Like, I do really appreciate that Arnold is more than a human being. Like, that man is pretty much a god among men. Like,
Yeah,
he's
100%.
done everything.
Yeah.
And he's good at everything that he does.
Yeah. Like, nobody else has transitioned that many times at that level
Exactly.
in one lifetime. Maybe since, like, I don't know, like,
Plato? I don't know.
Plato,
Da
even
Vinci?
maybe George Washington. He was kind of one track, but, like, he was like, exceptional.
Right.
Alexander the Great. Like,
Yeah,
like,
Arnold Schwarzenegger is going to be... If humanity is still around in 1,000 years from now,
Yeah.
they're going to be talking about Arnold still.
Yeah. Just, like, culturally, he has impacted the world on, like, at least 3 levels. I would say 2 to be, like bodybuilding and film.
Yeah.
He's 100% impacted the world. As a senator, that's kind of an add-on. But,
Yeah.
like, the fact that he transitioned into politics.
And had a
Is
successful career as well. in it as well.
Like, California loves him, so.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I think we can kind of end that piece on that. Let's talk about some of our favorite quotes because there are some great Arnold quotes in this.
Yeah. Like, I've already used up, like, some of the best. His Crom prayer, what do you think about that?
Right at the end of the movie?
Yeah,
It's like the last time he actually talks at the end of the
Yeah.
movie. Like,
I'll do it.
okay.
Crom, I have never prayed to you before. I have no tongue for it. No one, not even you, will remember if we were good men or bad, why we fought or why we died. All that matters is that 2 stood against many. That's what's important. Valor pleases you, Crom, so grant me one request. Grant me revenge, and if you do not listen, then to hell with you.
I like how you put a little bit of Irishness into that as
Did
well.
I? Fuck.
There was a
I didn't-
tingling.
Yeah, that's just me.
It's pretty epic. Like, it's pretty cool at the end there.
Yeah. Like, I hadn't really seen like a main character saying like to hell with you to their god. And so it's an interesting, and that's kind of like a Celtic thing, I think, too, or like an older religion thing where like they weren't
Definitely Celtic.
Yeah, they weren't like all or nothing with their god, but they were like, it was like a give and take. Like, I'll worship you, you give me this, and that's like an old fashioned, like, it fit the time period that he's kind of playing in.
Yeah, and that's also a little bit a part of a theme that we didn't talk about is the gods and whether or not the gods matter at this point in time.
Well, they do, because a guy could turn into a snake. Obviously, they matter.
It's like the red woman in Game of Thrones and the fire god. Like all the falling and like awkward action and everything. Yeah, there's some really great Arnold sounds.
Yeah.
I like how the ending of the movie kind of ends with like that monologue of like the narrator talking about like the feats that Conan goes on to do, and how like the story still continues.
Yeah.
Again, they kind of reminded me of Mad Max. I did enjoy that ending. He also looks really badass sitting on his throne like that at the end too.
Oh yeah, that set up the next movie so fucking well. Everyone who watched the first one was gonna watch the second one.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
honestly, like, Thulsa Doom he wasn't super fleshed out well, but he was unique and he was good. Like, he was a decent villain.
Yeah, and I think that's what James Earl Jones brought to the movie itself. Like,
if it was anyone else, if it was anyone unknown, it would have been bland.
Yeah.
But he added that gravitas to it.
He just has such a great voice, and he just uses it so well.
And, like, his like, uncaring face, like, his stare worked well. You don't really see that too much in Star Wars, but, you know.
True.
Oh, the orgy scene. That was pretty, like, visceral.
Yeah?
Like,
it definitely is a callback to, like, the Roman Empire, for sure.
Yeah, whereas, like, they were using, like, in the Roman Empire, they were, like, spilling olive oil all over everybody.
Yeah.
These people, because they were a fucked up cult, were using the rendered fat of humans.
Yeah, how
and,
gross
like,
is that?
You could tell the hands in the jar, like, in the big cauldron, were, like, completely fake. And there was even, like, a head in there and everything. Yeah. But, like, it was still such a cool concept.
Well, the head wasn't the head in there because he cut it off and it fell in?
No, I don't think so.
Oh, okay.
I'm not 100% on that, but I don't think so.
Because when he, like, poured it out kind of thing?
Yeah, it was...
I'm pretty sure he cut his head off and his head fell into there.
Maybe I missed that. But
yeah,
I think it was just when they were stirring it or something.
I'll have to pay attention on the next rewatch, buddy.
Yeah, a few years for that probably. But anyways, but yeah, like that. I actually really liked that fight sequence and like the guy with the big hammer. You could tell the hammer was really light though, like it wasn't full metal or anything, but it was fun.
I like how Valeria's ghost comes back at the end. I thought that was a cool touch.
Yeah.
I didn't like
and,
her
like,
line
shining...
was a little teachy, like not my favorite. Like, do you want to live forever?
Yeah.
But
because it was a reference to earlier when she said that.
Yeah.
So,
but I thought it was cool how she came back.
Yeah.
It was cool. It was badass.
Yeah. I want more from the world that they live in.
Yes, and that's
where it leaves you. Like, it leaves you wanting more because you didn't get it from the movie.
Exactly. Would this actually be better as a TV show?
100%. But that's hard to say because look at Wheel of Time.
Yeah.
Wheel of Time is a...
Yeah, but we don't have a movie to compare the Wheel of Time to, though.
No, but I'm saying the Wheel of Time as itself with the books... It's still stepping so far away from the books. That's fine, but it's missing certain elements.
Well, and that probably just comes down to production and who's producing it, right?
Yeah.
Like, do the people understand the source material that they're...
We're supposed to, man. Like, Rafe, the guy who's running it, everything leading up to it made it seem like he very much understood, but then something fell apart.
Yeah, that's fair.
I would say a Conan show might do very well if it was produced by the right people and everything, of course. Same with another movie series. Yeah. But apparently it's hard to do because they tried it in 2011 with Jason Momoa. Jason Momoa would have been perfect as Conan, too. Because he's more, like... He fits more with that time period, kind of.
Well, and here's the other thing, I think it becomes difficult as well when you already have the expectations and you already have a bar. Because when you have the Conan bar, you, like, automatically, as a studio, you want to make a movie. Because Conan was already a movie. Automatically, there are certain aspects that you want to make out of Conan, that you want to, like, rehash, basically, because you feel you have to, because that's what the audience liked. I think it becomes a little bit harder to take some of these risks that we're talking about.
Yeah, but no, like, people are taking risks still. Like, there's risks that are being taken. Yeah. It's just not as often, and the studios have their hand in everything, and like...
And especially if it's going to be a big budget thing, right? Like...
And it has to be if it's Sword and Sorcery.
It absolutely has to be if it's Sword and Sorcery. I fully agree with that. And especially if you're going to do something like the Wheel of Time, where you're going to these different scenery, like you're dealing with different landscapes and different peoples and different customs and everything else. Like, if you're in the same city and it's like the same it looks like the same time period. It's everybody's wearing the same thing. It's a little bit easier. You can get away with like cheating on a few things. But if suddenly like every week you've got like a new, like suddenly we're in Conan, we're exploring barbarians, and then we're exploring like medieval times. There's potentially a samurai world here that we haven't really explored. There's the cult themselves. Like, it's probably a little bit more difficult to kind of zero in on these different settings.
I don't fully agree. Like, I understand the difficulty there, but I think someone could fucking do it right. And yeah, I think show might do it
for a medium budget though.
Yeah, the people have done some crazy shit with low budgets. It's just not the right people for other things. Like, there's the right person for the job, and we haven't found it yet, or they haven't found Conan yet, or something.
Well, and at this point in time, like, IPs are valuable, and like the studios have recognized that there's value.
Yeah,
in,
it's
like,
the politics of it all.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you don't want to you almost probably don't want to take a risk, because if you have like a bad movie or a bad TV show of
like
this
the
franchise,
2011 Conan,
like who wants to see another Conan movie after that? Same with Star Wars. Like, it feels like Star Wars is going down this path of like I don't care.
Mando was great. I loved The Mandalorian, and then Boba Fett, decent. I liked it, but Mando saved it in the end. Because the Mando line, like the Mando shit was great, and then Mandalorian for anyone, whatever, and then the newest one, Kenobi, fucking sucked. I was so pissed watching that.
See, and I've kind of given up. Like, I've recognized that either maybe Star Wars isn't for me anymore, or maybe the studios just doesn't understand what good Star Wars is.
Yeah, and I think it's like if Jon Favreau did everything, like every single show, it would be good. But he can't do every single one and have this release schedule that they want to keep the audience in like actively watching and actively interested. Which
is like is almost a I can't even think of the word because I got COVID brain. Not an oxymoron, but like a conundrum in and of itself, because the original Star Wars franchise was 3 movies in the 70s and 80s, right?
Yeah.
And then we didn't have anything, like any movies in that franchise for 20 years. And
now they want to push them out.
The legend of the Star Wars was like so massive, and like the sale of like...
And like after that first trilogy, there were so many books.
Yeah.
So much source material, so many stories, so many
action figures, like everything.
But there's like 10,000 years almost written about. But they still go back to Tatooine with the same characters at the same time period. Yeah. Let's do a few years after. Let's do in between.
Yeah.
Let's do it just slightly before. Like there's so much more to this universe.
Yep. It's a literal universe.
A whole universe.
And we're focusing on the Skywalkers.
Yeah.
All right, when did this podcast become about Star Wars?
God damn it.
I don't know. I don't have too much else to add.
No, I think we're done for Conan.
So, this is probably a good spot to wrap up, I think. So our next movie, I'm really excited about this one. We're going to be doing Jaws for Shark Week.
Yeah.
Because things got a little bit messed up because of COVID, you're probably going to get this episode, and then right after get Jaws within a few days, or maybe at the same time, depending on what my editing time frame
double feature.
Like. Yeah, double feature week. So something to look forward to. That I guess you won't know about until at least this one is out. But
it's almost like 2 snakes coming together, facing each other, but they're one. That's another line from Conan.
I'm aware. Yes.
for the audience.
So I actually have never seen Jaws, and I'm looking forward to watching one of the biggest blockbuster movies of all time.
Yeah, like it's crazy that we haven't, but we're at the right age to not have watched it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we're
gonna be taking like. I think you and I can separate the level of fame that this movie has,
Yeah.
and we'll watch it and really determine whether A, it holds up or not still,
Yeah.
and B, if it's an objectively good movie. And I think it is an objectively good movie.
It must be.
I'm going in
Yeah. And
with
it's
expectations.
like there's never been another shark movie that pops into your mind. If someone's like shark movie, you say Jaws.
Absolutely.
So they had a unique premise that hadn't been done before, or at least not well known at all.
Mm-hmm.
Like it is the shark movie.
Absolutely.
So they killed it. Apparently,
yeah.
they crushed it. Like it is It's a pop culture phenomenon.
Oh, absolutely it is.
So,
Like
yeah.
even the soundtrack is something
yeah.
of historic importance.
Yeah.
But let's save all this talk for next week.
Yes, let's do it.
All right. Have a good one, everyone. I'm really excited to be back and podcasting. And I'm looking forward to the upcoming few months.
Yes.
Yes!
Yeah. I was trying
Yes!
to do a Conan.
Oh, oh, oh.